Hey guys, Will here. So I've talked a little bit on this channel recently about how sometimes in this line of work, when you're constantly reviewing really nice products, it's actually easy to get a little bit desensitized and start to become a little bit numb to it all. And every so often a product comes along that kind of gives you a bit of a kick in the guts and reminds you just how lucky you are to be doing what you're doing. And that has definitely been the case with the product that we're going to be reviewing today. I've been using this for a couple of days now and really loving it. So this is the Simcore STD-24WS Simucube 2 wireless button box. So there are a couple of different versions of this available. There's a USB version, there's a version that comes with a Sparco P10 as well as a couple of other wheels, and there's even a rally specific version as well that comes with a push-pull style shifter. So check out the Simcore website, link down in the description below for all the various different options that are available. You also have the ability with this button box to do a bunch of customization to your own personal preference. Types of switches, encoders, funky switches, stickers, all those sorts of things. And I'll cover all of that in more detail as we get through the video. But today we're going to be having a look specifically at the Boosted Media Special Edition version. So this is the version that I've worked with George at Simcore to customize to have the functionality that I think is most important for as many different types of sim racing as possible. So if you want to change things around and customize it to your own personal preference, of course you can do that. But if you do decide you want to pick up exactly what we have here in front of us, there's an option to do that too. And a small percentage of the profits from the sales come back to helping out with the channel. So really appreciate your support there. But anyway, today we're going to be taking a more detailed look. We'll show you the customization options that are available. We'll show you all the details around how the shifters work, the buttons work, the quality, the fit and finish. And then we'll get it mounted up to this MOMO Team 300 wheel and take it for a spin. So let's get going. All right, so one of the first things that you'll notice when you pick this up out of the box is it's actually a lot lighter than you might be expecting. 670 grams for what we have in our hands here, including the aluminium front plate, which is an optional accessory, but something that I would recommend you get. And I'll explain the reasons for that a little bit later on. It doesn't include the weight of the paddles, of course. I'll show you those in just a moment as well. They do vary in sizes depending on obviously what you order, and they range from about 10 grams up to about 20 grams. So 670, 690 grams odd for the button box itself, and then add on obviously the weight of the wheel and whatever quick release system you're going to be using on top of that. Now the reason why it's so light is that other than the plastic on the switches and obviously the electronics and wiring internally, pretty much everything on this is billet aluminium or carbon fiber. So if we get up a little closer on this, you can see the multiple layers of carbon fiber there. It is genuine carbon fiber. It's not some sort of a reinforced plastic or anything like that. And then the entire rear panel here is all one sort of unibody billet aluminium enclosure. The cages for the paddles as well, all billet aluminium. You get the point. And straight away, you can see that this thing just screams quality, which is of course what we were expecting, particularly for the price as well. It's not a cheap unit. It is fairly priced compared to its competitors, I would say, but it's certainly on the more high end of things as far as button boxes go. Now, speaking to the Simucube 2 wireless version specifically here, we are limited to a total of 28 inputs, including the shifters. So we are only using 24 here, but I think it's a pretty good number that gives us pretty much everything that we could want. Maybe the addition of some rotary encoders on either side here, which would take us up to the 28 limitation, might be nice, but we'll comment on that more when we go for a drive a little bit later. But the layout that we have here, and remembering that this can be customized as well, is two funky switches here. And what I mean by funky switch, for those who might not be familiar with the term, is essentially a push button, a four-way hat switch, so up, down, left, and right, and then a rotary encoder as well for 7 functions in total. And those feel really nice. They've got a nice little amount of movement there, so you can kind of, feel the direction you're going to go before you actually click it. And then you can feel if you try to go in a direction that it's not designed to click, it just kind of won't go. So on the Boosted Media Special Edition, and if you customize it that way, you get one of those on either side. You can also opt to have a rotary encoder with a push button function as well. So left and right plus pushing down on either side, one or the other or both. So it's just completely up to you what you want to do. In my opinion, it kind of makes sense to have the two funky switches because you've got the function of the rotary encoder should you want it, as well as the push button, plus the added functionality of up, down, left, and right, which is particularly useful for navigating through menus and things like that inside your favorite sim. So that is my recommendation anyway, but you guys are free to sort of configure that however you want. So let's go over the remainder of the inputs on the front face of the wheel, and then we'll move on to the shifters. So we've got 4 more little momentary switches here, little guys that you can assign, again, obviously to whatever function you want. I've got traction control minus, plus, wiper, and flash. And these are just momentary switches, meaning that they don't click into position. You don't click them on and off. You simply just push them, it performs the function, and then you let go and the function stops. Now, interestingly, these don't really have a tactile click to them. So let me just show you here. You can see a little plastic stem there, about 5 millimeters of throw on the switch. And if I shut up for just a second, which is unusual for me, no click, no nothing. It's just like a push in, push. It almost feels like pulling the trigger on a water pistol or something like that. So it's going to be really interesting when we go for a drive to see whether you need to push the button all the way in for it to register the input, or whether just a little tiny tap is enough. So it's an interesting choice. I'm sure that there's a reason for it, but we'll talk about that a little bit more when we go for a drive in just a moment. So that's those guys. And then we've got our 4 larger buttons across the top, 2 of which obviously, as you can see here, are protected with little shields so you don't push them by accident. And this is really useful for when you're driving in VR, so you can feel the difference between the different buttons. You can tell whether you're pushing your DRS or your limiter, for example. You wouldn't want to hit your limiter while you're doing 300 clicks down the straight. And likewise on this side too. Now these buttons are, without a doubt, the nicest feeling buttons I think I've ever felt on pretty much anything. So let me just show you this quickly. Absolutely beautiful click to them. You know, you guys know by now I've got a thing for button clicks, but these feel absolutely beautiful. I love the rounded surface on the top too. You can kind of hit it from any angle. Another thing that I've noticed as well immediately before I even go for a drive with this wheel or install it on an actual wheel is there's no sort of hint of echo through the casing or anything like that. As I said before, it is a unibody sort of hollow aluminium, billet aluminium design. But when I push those buttons, it's not echoing through the chamber or anything like that, which can sort of lead to a cheap and flimsy feeling. And some of the wheels that I've tested, most of them are pretty good these days, but yeah, no echo there at all. And you're certainly not going to be pushing those buttons by accident. Again, about a 3 or 4 millimeter throw, I'd say, on that. And I think that's pretty much all we can say for the switches on the front. So let's now have a look at these shifters in more detail. So as of course you would expect for a button box of this price, neodymium magnets on both. So a very crisp and solid action when you push the shifter. And obviously, again, we'll talk about this more when we go for a drive in just a minute. Now it is metal on metal contact here. You can see the back surface of the paddle there is making direct contact with the surface of the casing, or the cage as it's called. So it does meet with a nice flat surface there, got a nice sort of solid click to it, but there's no little rubber stoppers in there or anything. So we'll comment on the volume or the loudness of it when we go for a drive in just a moment as well. Now it is a contact switch style switch, so it's not a Hall effect sensor or anything like that. We've talked about Hall effect sensors before on the channel. Cube Controls use them in their shifters for their more modern wheels. Now, I don't really see an advantage to using them other than, you know, adding additional complexity to the overall design. I have had on one of my Cube Controls wheels needed to adjust the amplifier to bring it back into spec as the battery voltage dropped down. So yeah, look, I don't really see the need to move away from contact switches, and these are very high quality contact switches. If you can see in there on the casing, you've got a little 3D printed, looks like, housing here that says Simcore, but the actual switch itself has got Cherry written on it, which is a well-known contact switch brand. And it does have a little dust boot in there as well. So I'm just trying to get the focus on the camera there for you. As we pop that in, you can see the little dust jacket squeezes in and out. So we shouldn't have any problems with the tactile feel of the switch changing over time as it accumulates dust or debris or anything like that. But coming out perpendicular to the wheel like this at a straight angle of 90 degrees is a pretty standard practice in terms of design. If we just quickly have a look at some other wheels, just while we've got them here actually. If we have a look at the Cube Controls wheel, you can see that does come out at a steeper angle, and it does have some adjustability in there as well. But these ones, just with a crude measurement pushing down on a set of scales, gives me a activation force, let's call it, of about 300 to 400 grams, whereas the Simcore is about 2 kilograms. So it needs about 2 kilograms of force to get that to actuate. And you can see that's got a much more solid snap to it. Now it is a subjective thing. Some people will prefer the feel of one over the other. I have a feeling I'm going to get along with this just fine. Asher Racing F28 SC. This actually does have adjustable magnetic force, so it actually comes with different magnets depending on how much force you want to feel. But otherwise, they're magnetic shifters. They do magnetic shifter things. And while we're here, just for comparison reasons, because we can, we've got the F1 2020 wheel from Fanatic with the newly released Club Sport magnetic paddle module. And again, a very similar design. The only fundamental difference here is that this does have little rubber stoppers in there that dampen the sound a little bit. They do also dampen the feel. Kind of gets rid of that crisp click that you feel. You can take those little dampers off, but yeah, we'll talk about the shifters a little bit more when we go for a drive, but I think I'm going to absolutely love those. So let's talk a little bit more about the customization options that we have available on this wheel. So we already talked a little bit about the buttons. You can choose the colors for the button caps. All you need to do is just get in contact with George and he'll let you know what the options are for those. I've seen red, I've seen blue, I've seen black, I've seen yellow. And, you know, I kind of went for a nice clean design with this. Now, if you do want to order the Boosted Media Special Edition, you can still customize the colors as well. And that goes for the anodizing on the Rotary Encoders or funky switches, depending on which path you take with those. The collars around these switches, the switch colors themselves, and of course the stickers too. So you can choose the color, the print color, as well as the background color, and obviously customize the text that's on those as well. You obviously have the option of the Boosted Media branding if you go for the special edition, or Simcore branding, or just plain, or you can even go a custom logo of your own, which you can supply as a vector file in Adobe Illustrator format. And George will be able to laser etch that into the cover for you as well. So let's just give you a quick look at that too. Now, there is one other very, very important customization option as well that we need to discuss. So let's just quickly move that off to the side here and talk about our paddles. So here in front of us, we have the various different paddles that are available for this wheel. Now, it's important to understand these aren't all included when you buy. You do have to choose which ones you want. I just asked George to send me all of them so I could show you guys. So we have the smaller style GT, the larger style GT, the larger style Indy, as he's calling them, and the smaller style Indy. I guess you could also call them Formula. So as I'm going to be installing it on a round wheel as a bit of an all-rounder that I can use for rally, drifting, and all kinds of different things, I'm going to go with the larger style GT paddles, and I think that's probably going to suit me best. If I end up changing it later on, I will let you guys know in the conclusion when we go for the driving test, but I think that's probably going to be the best all-rounder for me. Now, just before we get everything installed, I did just want to quickly run through this front plate for you as well, and the reason why I think that that's important, as well as take you through a bit of the stuff on the back here, and also have a quick chat about the battery. So let's start off by removing this plate, and I'll just quickly show you exactly what I'm talking about. So this little aluminium plate will set you back an extra 39 Australian dollars, but the reason why I say it's important is when you mount your wheel, because there's no recess behind the stud pattern here, you don't have a whole lot of space available. You don't have any throwback distance between the opening in the wheel. And obviously this will depend on the wheel that you're installing. If it's a solid wheel, then this isn't important. But for a wheel that's got a cutout like this, you don't have any throwback distance there. So if you've got something like a horn module, you can't install that and then also install the wheel without having some sort of a spacer behind that. And you can imagine if you have a spacer there, then that's going to throw back the distance of all your buttons, your shifters, and everything else. It's just going to throw everything out of whack. So that's the reason why I say, if you don't really want to have that kind of unfinished look, when you add that on top of it, it obviously looks a lot cleaner. Okay, so we're going to remove these little screws from out of the back here. And even just little details, I just want to point this out to you as well. Just little details like these spacers. You know, everything on this is just pure art, at least to me. These are the sorts of little things, these are little details that I look for and that I appreciate in this kind of premium gear. So we'll take both of those out and then get these paddles installed. So the way that you go about installing these is obviously going to depend on the wheel that you intend to use it with. In the case of my MOMO Team 300mm wheel, you can see there is a little bit of a dish on that wheel. Throws back probably about a centimeter and a half. And that does push the paddles a little bit further back than I would like. So what I suggested to George and what he's going to be including on all future purchases is some little spaces similar to what we have with the Fanatic magnetic paddle modules and Podium advanced paddle modules, so that we can move those paddles a little bit further forward. I could get it to work. What I ended up doing was installing them on the front, obviously, this way around. and then putting the screws through from the front. But yeah, that is just something that I wanted to point out because it's something that I don't have on me right now, but George will be including those in the future when you guys buy these. I should point out here as well before we move on that these are also 3mm thick carbon fiber, so no issues at all with flex. We'll comment on it when we go for a drive, but yeah, just fiddling with this right now. Not going to run into any problems with flex that I can see. And it does have a nice sort of beveled edge around the side as well. Not too much, but just enough that it's not going to, you know, catch your skin or cut you if you've got soft, sensitive skin, girly hands like I have. Okay, so that is the paddles both installed. Let's flip it over quickly before we install the wheel and have a little bit more of a chat about the battery life, and the wireless system in general. So pop off the cover here, and there we go. So it's a 3-volt, 1600 milliamp hour battery, a CR123A, which I believe these go for about a grand total of $2 in pretty much any. I think you can buy them in Target or, you know, depending on where you are in the world. Best Buy probably sells them. Your local chemist store would probably sell them as well. Relatively common battery. And George tells me that this is good for at least a year's worth of battery life if you switch it off. It's going to be a little bit shorter than that if you leave the wheel turned on. But the way this works, it's sort of only waking up and activating itself when you actually push a button on the button box or a shifter or something like that. It's not sort of having to maintain a connection all the time. It pairs itself and it goes sort of into like a low power state or a standby mode. So the power consumption, even when it's turned on, when you're not pushing a button, is extremely low. It wakes up and transmits when you push a button. So very similar to what we have with the Asher F28SC. Battery compartment there, power switch there. We can see we've got a little stubby SMA antenna there for the Bluetooth connection, and we'll talk about signal quality once we get over onto the PC in just a minute. And then of course a nice little power switch off and on there as well. So not something that you're going to catch and bump by accident. Actually does have a little blinking power light there. That's going to tell us that we're in pairing mode, I assume. I wasn't aware that that was there. So that's flashing as pairing, and then it should go to a solid red once it's connected, I would imagine. Anyway, let's get the wheel installed and start doing some driving. And there we are. Oh boy. This is a seriously nice looking wheel. So in case you're wondering, that is the HRS Zero Play Quick Release wheel side adapter. We do have a review on the entire assembly as well that you guys can check out on the channel. Highly recommend that as a quick release system. It's been absolutely flawless in the time that I've been using it, at least. But there we go. Let's go for a drive. Okay, so driving experience. Now, the main reason why I chose a Team 300 wheel is I do quite a lot of skip barber driving at the moment. I prefer a smaller diameter wheel for that style of car. So I jumped straight into the Skippy to go for a drive and sort of just get the overall feel for the wheel as a whole, and really happy with it. No flex discernible whatsoever, either in the wheel, the rim itself, or through the body of the button box. But really the Skippy isn't an ideal car to be testing out a button box because you don't really spend a whole lot of time twiddling dials or making adjustments anyway. So I jumped into the Porsche 911 Cup car and put things to a little bit more of a test. So I found the Rotary Encoders were very easy to play with. I always like to adjust my brake bias down after the first few laps in a Porsche 911 Cup race just to make it a little bit easier to drive. And yeah, we had no problem at all doing that. Didn't find that I was bumping buttons or doing anything crazy. I was able to find what I was doing, both in VR as well as triple screens. No problem finding the button and feeling when I'd made an adjustment. I could feel the clicks quite easily, either with gloves on or gloves off. There was no problems with turning it too many times. I really feel like the detents on the Rotary Encoders in particular are absolutely spot on. Now, with regards to those smaller momentary switches that we discussed earlier in the video. I actually found that the difference in feel between the larger button right beside it and the smaller button was actually quite useful when I was driving, particularly in VR. You don't really notice the difference in the shape of the button so much when you're in VR, particularly with gloves on, but you do notice the difference in feel. So having buttons that feel so drastically different from each other right next to each other makes it very, very easy to determine which button you're pressing and not make mistakes. So you do have to push those other switches pretty much all the way to the maximum threshold to get the activation, as opposed to the larger switches, which are more of a purposeful click. But because you're not really assigning those to functions that you would, have an adverse effect if you were to press them when you were driving. So things like flashing lights or windscreen wipers. And I think upon reflection, having driven with the wheel now for a couple of days, this is probably a wise design choice because it does make it a lot easier to determine between the two buttons. But other than that, there's really not a whole lot to say about the driving experience. I mean, it does exactly what a button box should do. It looks absolutely gorgeous. As I said, it's something that I appreciate and admire every single time I jump into the sim now. I just kind of sit there for a moment and sort of just go, man, this looks good. So again, after driving with these for a few days, I would have to say that these are my favorite shifters out of all the wheels that I've tested as well. I can't exactly put my finger on why that is. They just have a really, really nice feel to them. It just feels like, a massive amount of thought has gone into exactly how they feel through every stage of the shift, from sort of releasing the magnet to clicking the button. I've mentioned before in reviews how sometimes I have a habit of sort of holding the button right at the threshold of the click and then pulling it that little bit further to have the click. And you can definitely do that with these shifters. But because they do have what I think at least is exactly the right amount of magnetic force, you kind of don't end up developing that habit. You do sort of use them more as a snapping switch rather than something that you can kind of hold part way through the motion. So hopefully that makes sense. So that leads me now to the only two little nitpicks that I do have with this wheel. And that is simply, I would love to have a little power LED to let me know when I've left the wheel on when I'm getting out of the sim, so I remember to switch it off. I did find that not having any illumination on the front of the wheel kind of did lend itself to me walking away without switching it off. Not that it really matters with this wheel because of the way it's designed, as we discussed earlier in the video, but I do like to switch things off when I'm not using them, and I did find that I was forgetting quite often with this wheel. The only other thing that I would love to have had is rotary encoders for the thumbs. I find this particularly useful when driving formula style cars where you're wanting to adjust things like ERS and fuel trim while you're driving. You can do it with the rotary encoders, as you can see here with me driving an F1 2020, but it does require you to sort of take your hands off the wheel and kind of take your eyes off the action to an extent. And I did find that definitely slowed me down. Now, admittedly, at this price point, the majority of people that are doing serious formula style driving aren't going to be using this button box anyway. So it's probably not going to be a problem for you. Probably going to be looking at a formula style wheel. But yeah, I think that given that we do have those 4 additional inputs that are unutilized on this button box, it would be nice to have those rotary encoders. I did feed this back to George, and what he told me was that the reason for that is that a lot of people using the P310 Sparko wheel obviously want to make use of the 2 buttons that are available on the face of the wheel itself. So he does pre-wire the button box with that in mind, which obviously takes up 2 additional inputs, meaning that you wouldn't be able to have the 2 thumb encoders anyway. So that's the reason why they aren't there. But for me, the only major change that I would make to this wheel, for my own personal use at least, would be the addition of 2 thumb encoders, just to make it a little bit easier for those style of cars where you do need to change those sorts of settings often. But overall, I've got to say, an absolutely brilliant button box. So there you have it, guys. That is the STD-24WS wireless Simucube 2 button box from Simcore. And as I said at the start of the video, there are other versions available too. So there's a USB version, there's a version that comes with the rally push-pull style shifter, as well as bundled with different types of wheels as well. So plenty of options available there too. And as I mentioned, you can also customize colors, button options. You can change the funky switches to rotary encoders if you wish to do so. But if you do want to pick up exactly what you've seen in this video, this is the Boosted Media Special Edition, and if you select from the little drop down box on their website, a small little commission from those sales comes back to helping out with the channel. So really do greatly appreciate that, guys. That's what keeps this channel running. And yeah, look, really at the end of the day, there's not really a whole lot to dislike about this button box. I think that, potentially if you're not in the market for a Simucube 2 wireless button box specifically, you might want to take a look at some of the other options that are out there that offer a little bit more in terms of functionality, USB screens integrated, additional rotary encoders, analog paddles, and things like that. But look, if you're looking for a Simucube 2 wireless button box, then this is definitely amongst the best, if not the best, that I've tested so far. Things like the buttons, they just feel absolutely beautiful, and it's hard to express, just the difference in terms of immersion that quality buttons do make. But when you have a button box like this, when you've tried something like this, you know, the difference definitely is something that you'll notice and appreciate every single day. And as I've said before with other products that we reviewed, the analog shifter that we reviewed recently as well in particular, having that kind of quality equipment is something that you just appreciate and admire every single time you get in the rig. And, you know, that to me is worth paying a little bit extra over some of the other alternatives that are out there. But yeah, look guys, I really hope this video has helped you guys out, and yeah, leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. As always, make sure you're subbed, hit the notification bell too so you don't miss future videos, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.